associate pastor at Grace and have the privilege to kind of rub shoulders with guys like Rick. And as I saw them get going and they were meeting consistently, I was very intrigued. And so I, from time to time, have joined them for different things they've done. I've been on the camp out and things. But what struck me in watching the video today is how different some of the dads in that video would have walked through the last 18 months in their family situation. So Evan, the one guy that had the young daughter at the beginning and says, I need guys that have gone before me. That daughter's older, and just last Sunday, his youngest daughter was baptized. And it's just a great thing to celebrate. It's a community thing here. You see Miles with the son who talked about chocolate, and they just started laughing. Miles had significant health issues and multiple surgeries, and it was cool to see the impact of this core group of dads come together and walk with this family. And we've always said, how do people go through things like this, life circumstances that aren't part of a community of faith? And so you see that in this Dads of Grace, and that's one of the things I think we're most thankful for, to see the impact. I thought about how to talk about the impact that partnering with Rick has had on our church, and I thought about some questions. I think the partnership that we have with Rick and Faithful Fathering, an initiative in the beginning of this ministry of Grace called Dads of Grace, known as DOGS, which we don't talk a lot about, it addresses some questions that I've heard at Grace for a long time, and maybe in some of our churches. And they go like this. How do we get men engaged in their faith? From moving from just sitting in a pew, not participating in anything else. How can we get men to model faith to their kids? How do we move away from a staff-driven church? How do we get started and grow a ministry to younger men at our church that are fathers? And see, I think the impact that we've seen in the last 18 months has been just that. It's addressed some of those questions because of this partnership and what God has done through these relationships. And I also think of maybe the bigger issue that's addressed by the partnership is this idea that the misnomer that everyone thinks that the greatest influence on our kids' lives are their friends and their peers. But all the study stuff that I read, if you've read any stuff by Chap Clark and stuff that he leans into heavily in that book, Hurt, is that parents are the biggest influence in their kids' lives. And we have to think that's good and bad, right? Because we have this significant role of influence in their lives. And so, for me, I just am excited about the fact that we're now saying and have a platform, it's a great word, to talk about here's what we do as a church. That it's just not mom making sure the kids are in the car to show up on Sunday mornings, but dad is invested in the life of his own kids and his faith. Instead of trying to hammer down, I want you to grow up to know Christ, and you better do as I say, now we see dads actively engaging, living out their faith. There's an expression you may have heard, you get what you are, and that's actually kind of scary. And just a real brief, I remember one day I looked at my hand, and I said, that's my father's hand. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. You realize you're chip off the old block, right? But that's what happens to our kids, and the way in which we live our lives of faith models a lot more to them than what we say. We know these things. So I think that's the biggest issue I've seen an impact, is it's shaping dads to understand the role that they have, and that you get what you are. And so I love that we have this Dad's Armor Bible study, because we are now seeing dads saying, I need to invest in my faith growth, because that's what's most important. Not just making sure my kid's growing, but I'm growing, because that's actually where it all begins. So here's some of the things I'll say, this partnership I've seen. Seen dads growing in their faith and kids learning by watching their dads. Dads more committed to growing in their faith, expressed in a consistent presence in worship and Sunday school and starting Bible studies. Dads engaging in ministry to serve in ministries at the church and going on mission trips and serving others, which wasn't happening, but maybe at a very small level at Grace before. The church staff, which is my favorite one, trying to figure out what do we do with a ministry that's begun by members of the congregation and not the staff saying, hey, you need to do this. And so we're having to figure out what it means to be church in a non-staff driven way, which for us is good. And Eric and I were talking about earlier that we need to do some things that'll help grow that, and what's the role of the staff in that, and that's exciting. I'm thankful for that today. And then the last thing I'll say is the impact I see is this ministry is developed called Dads of Grace, and it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, like it's not going to dissolve. It's something that God is using to reach other dads, to make a difference in their lives, and even in mine. I see the difference it's making. One of my 3 daughters comes up to me, how I respond. Because now I'm starting to think through a different lens. The way I respond to my daughter is going to shape so much about what she thinks of faith in Christ. And so that's a major impact in my own life. So I'm certainly thankful to Rick and his investment of time and energy and presence and coming alongside dads at Grace is unreal. And I think of him and what he does, and that's a model for us as pastors, as dads, as men, being peers and friends in relationships. So great impact, and I appreciate all that Rick's done, and hopefully you're encouraged to begin to do things similar to at your church setting and see what God has in store for us. So thank you for your time.